Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure actually to follow on from the opening speeches in this debate. And I've listened to both the front bench and the shadow front bench with a lot of interest, and it feels like Groundhog Day, if I may say so, on many, many counts and many fronts. And I really do want to say, first and foremost, there is much to welcome in this bill. I myself cover the scars, I should say, from having taken a number of criminal justice measures through this House, and with great pleasure actually working with colleagues and some of my backbench colleagues as well, who also served in government with me. And I think all of us can today reflect upon how important it is with this new criminal justice legislation to absolutely strike a fundamental balance between protecting civil liberties, supporting victims wholeheartedly in everything that we do as legislators, preventing crime, that is absolutely front and centre of what the bill must do, and also punishing offenders. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a point of reflection. We've been in the House over a number of weeks actually discussing and debating in separate debates, urgent questions and statements, all of those themes. When it comes to punishing offenders, I know the Lord Chancellor has stood at the dispatch box actually trying to address an issue that we have with prison spaces, while at the same time we're having a conversation about preventing crime and supporting victims. These are all very personal and human aspects that we must as a House get the balance right on. And I think with that, that's why new laws also need to be made available to operationalise, and I can't emphasise this enough, operationalise and bring in practical measures to deliver these desired effects and outcomes. Because too often we can bring in legislation, and I've seen it, and I think that's even today's discussion thus far in this early debate has not fully reflected what it means to put into practice the delivery of some of those measures, what it means in terms of resourcing around policing, perhaps even custody spaces, prison spaces, use of stop and search, but importantly how we put victims front and centre in everything that we do. But also we must demonstrate why these desired impacts are needed above and beyond what's already in place. We have good measures in place already, but now we have to reflect upon those measures and go over and beyond in light of some of the points that have been made already, and I'm going to come to many of these points too. I also know that while this bill is going through Parliament, the front bench and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary in particular, is going to brace himself for the significant amount of lobbying that's going to come his way, both inside the House and outside this House. And I reflect upon this because actually there is a great deal of experience that will come his way, and I think it's a moment for him to reflect through those important discussions, again, the practicalities, not just about what goes on the face of the bill, but the practicalities of the delivery. And I know, and I thank him for the conversations we've had in the last week as well, because I think he'll build upon many practical suggestions that will come his way. Before I comment on measures specifically in this bill, I do want to just reflect, and I think it's important to reflect on the actions that have been taken in recent years and the difference they are making. And I say this because it's too easy to come in and sort of throw baby out with the bathwater, but actually there's a lot of good that has been brought forward in previous bills. And I do want to, and I will pay tribute later on in my remarks as well, when it comes to the investment and the recruitment of 20,000 more police officers, and the impact this actually has on the criminal justice system, but actually upon building on public confidence when it comes to policing. We should never ever stand still on this, because I think at the end of the day the public look to us all, and certainly a Conservative government, to ensure that we are the ones that have the manpower to tackle crime. Antisocial behaviour has already been mentioned and referenced, but importantly give the public confidence that law and order is on their side, and importantly that we'll use every pillar and strain every sinew of law and order, including police officers, our criminal justice system, to be on their side. And with that, of course, there is the Beating Crime Plan, and that gave huge details, significant details, on measures to target hotspots of criminal activity. Many of these elements have already been touched on: antisocial behaviour, homicide. There are some dreadful aspects, including knife crime as well. For example, though, the introduction of violence reduction units, the investment in safer streets and safer streets funds, all of these are important measures that have to be built upon when it actually comes to delivering practical safety and building confidence in the criminal justice system. Tackling action on drug gangs. Oh, sorry, yes, I will give way. My apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, for giving way. She talked about having confidence in the criminal justice system. I'll park for a moment why we're seeing an increase in police numbers. Obviously, there was a drop before. But does she not agree that one of the biggest problems is the huge backlog in courts, not as a result of COVID, that has exacerbated, but it was there before. It'll take till 2025 to even anywhere near back to that. I have a constituent who was violently attacked. It was 3 years before her court case was taken. This was in front of her 7-year-old child. It leaves the police powerless as that individual can keep breaking his non-molestation order and getting no further action. So it's all very well having the police officers, but does she have anything to say about the court system?
It's absolutely right, and I think we've discussed these issues more broadly in terms of an end-to-end criminal justice system being fit for purpose, working absolutely in a sensible time frame, and also the ability to process cases. And actually, that's the police processing the cases with the CPS, and then obviously going to court. I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a lot of merit in the whole debate particularly around sexual violence cases, rape cases. We've discussed this many times, and there is much more that can be done. There is some good support that's been brought in. I do want to touch upon that in terms of violence against women and girls, the rape review that has taken place, the investment on IDVAs. But actually, I think there are fundamental issues around the criminal justice system in cases of this nature. And actually, the time it takes, the level of attrition we see in these cases, but also the re-traumatisation of victims of crime as well, because these cases are absolutely appalling. And I suspect, I've raised this in this House many times, I've spoken from the dispatch box as well, on personal cases that I know have come to me through constituents. All of us have constituency cases, and I'm afraid they are tragic, and we have to make sure we are strong advocates to bring justice for those particular victims. Yeah. I do just want to come on to a number of strong measures that are in place already. A great deal of work has taken place to tackle drug gangs and organised crime and county lines. And actually, I think the government deserves great credit on this, along with the work that took place on the Ring of Steel. I used to carp on about the fact that we don't grow these drugs in our country. Some of them are obviously manufactured. But at the end of the day, having a ring of steel around our ports and airports and making sure the scourge and the terrible, terrible chemicals, the drugs that come into our country, we do absolutely everything we can to stop this at source, is absolutely vital. And we should never, ever stop doing that work. And actually that also comes back to the investment that's required in our ports, but also law enforcement. The Violence Against Women and Girls strategy that I've just touched on, and the Domestic Abuse Act has helped victims of the most horrific crimes. And alongside that, I will touch on what more can be done in that area, and I do welcome the new minister to this area as well, and I look forward to working with her, because this is sensitive and it's difficult. Just on policing, the government has clearly enshrined the police covenant into the statute and given the police more powers to fight crime, and increase prison sentences. And this is all part of offender management and making our communities safer. So, yes, I will, of course.
I know that the former Home Secretary takes the police covenant very seriously. Would she agree with me that as well as the police covenant, we should have a police bravery award for those who lose their lives in the line of duty?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady is absolutely right on this, and we've had discussions about this previously as well. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, this might be an opportune moment just to pay tribute, actually, to those police officers that have lost their lives actually defending communities and, being braver than ever, actually going out there to just go after the criminals. There are so many acts of bravery that we see, and I'm sorry to say this, sometimes this is not recognised enough. And I do think a lot of our police officers sadly get a bad rap because of other reporting issues and all sorts of things. But the reality is that that front line that they are out there defending, they should be given so much tribute. We pay tribute to them, but also the right recognition. And there are the Police Bravery Awards. She's familiar with them as well. I mean, what a sobering moment where we actually honour our police officers, but in particular we must do more to represent the fallen and protect the family members as well, and that is why the police covenant is so important. And I would like this House and ministers in particular to do much more to just recognise collectively that bravery, because actually it affects the families of officers in a very, very challenging way.
Yeah, would you give way on that?
Of course I will.
I was moved, Madam Deputy Speaker, around the period of remembrance that Gloucestershire Constabulary arranged for a short ceremony in which all the MPs in our county gathered together with the Gloucestershire Constabulary to commemorate those who had died in earlier conflict and also those who have suffered during very difficult moments more recently. Does she agree that that's something that might be rolled out across the country?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and that's a very, very nice practical example of, again, a community coming together to commemorate and also recognise that public service. I mean, at the end of the day, we are speaking about people that give public service to our country to protect us all, while at the same time making enormous sacrifices. And I've had the great privilege of spending much of my time as Home Secretary with law enforcement, but actually with police officers on the front line, but actually some of their family members as well. And I've heard first-hand testimony as the sacrifices that they make, and particularly their loved ones when officers have died in the line of duty. And it's incredibly sobering. So this bill is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, and as the bill progresses, I would absolutely I look forward to working with the front bench on the measures that they're bringing in. But there are positive measures that I just would like to touch on, because there are sections in this bill that are hugely welcome. And of course, this goes further in actually giving public confidence around criminal justice, policing, but actually keeping our citizens and our country safe. The use of 3D printers, electronic communications devices to aid in theft of vehicles. We are great believers, I think it's fair to say, in designing crime out. Through the use of technology, making it harder for criminals that abuse the system to actually even commit the crime in the first place. And I think these measures need to be prevented, and these measures should help in that work. Criminals are clever themselves. They're constantly adapting. They're agile. They evolve their methods. And as legislators, we must be prepared to absolutely make sure that we can do more to support the police to fight these offenders. And I welcome from the government more details on how they will continue to grow this. I also support the work, the Police Minister touched on this already, on facial recognition. It's about time we actually stood up to some of the legal challenges that came forward, and we bring in more on facial recognition to strengthen law enforcement. I welcome the measures in clauses 9 and 10 and 18 relating to knives and bladed articles in particular. I do agree that there's more that can be done. This has been a subject of discussion in this House for a long time around online loopholes, around the purchasing of weapons, and I think that we could do much more there. It's a fact we are all horrified and shocked by the impact of knife crime on our streets, but of course it is the impact that it has on victims and their families, and the fact that so many young people, and this is where we can absolutely come together, so many young people, their lives are blighted by the horrors of knife crime, and our hearts go out to those victims of knife crimes, the victims and their family members. The grief and anguish that they endure, we never ever want to experience that ourselves, but also there's more that we can do. And I just pay tribute to many of the campaigners in this space, and we should stand with them to do much more. I'm also pleased to see that the bill includes, in Clause 13 and Schedule 2, new provisions to strengthen the legal framework to prevent people from intimate images being taken, shared and broadcast. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm referring to revenge porn. There are still loopholes, and we want to do more to close them. This is just a sickening offence, it really is. It blights people's lives, but I do just want to pay tribute actually to the revenge. It's a very high profile revenge porn case that Essex police investigated that led to the successful prosecution of an offender, and that was Stephen Bear. And I want to pay tribute to Georgia Harrison, she was just on television yesterday again, and I pay tribute to her bravery for speaking out so strongly and encouraging others to come forward, but also the way in which she has championed this in so many ways. I think it's right. Again, our laws have to be flexible and they adapt to modern technology, so victims are protected from people that commit these dreadful crimes. And that brings me on to measures in the bill that cover offender management, cover the management of offenders who have a record of coercive and controlling behaviour, and that is clause 30, to put them under the multi-agency public protection arrangements, which are very, very welcome. They really are. They build on a strong record of supporting victims of domestic abuse and violence, and it's vital that these measures are put into effective practice. I would also just like to, Madam Deputy Speaker, at this point, touch on, because I've mentioned domestic abuse and violence, a really harrowing aspect, which is obviously domestic abuse and homicides. There's a great deal of work that has taken place in the Home Office around domestic homicide reviews. I led that work. I would like to see this strengthened so much more, because we see too many loopholes where I'm afraid local authorities are not always working in the way in which we'd like them to follow up on domestic homicide reviews. And there's a lot of good practice out there that already exists with some local authorities championing this work, working with multi-agencies and obviously with law enforcement. I also welcome the measures in place to confiscate the proceeds of crime, that's clause 32, and serious crime prevention orders, which is clauses 34 and 37. Again, it's important that we constantly adapt. Our legislation is updated, and these measures are operationalised and implemented in a way that is effective. And I look forward to hearing more details from the government on this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've already touched on the great work undertaken to keep our streets safe and to fight crime, the work of the police in particular. They are on the front line, and I do believe that we should back the police when it comes to new technology, but actually as legislators in standing by them, also in difficult times when they are under scrutiny and public scrutiny around how they are policing and operationalising their own professional judgments. They are the ones that put themselves in harm's way to protect the public, and we've seen in recent weeks the pressures the police have faced when it comes to policing in challenging circumstances. I pay tribute to them. I've seen them in very, very difficult situations. They are skilled professionals, and the recruitment of 20,000 police officers, Madam Deputy Chairman, doesn't come out of the ether. There's a great deal of detailed work that took place around that recruitment, but also it's the recruitment and retention of them, how our laws back them, but also how new technology and funding enables them to do their jobs. I think they're a credit to our country, our police officers, I really do, and I think we should always show our appreciation to them. They are diligent and maintain the highest possible standards. I've seen that myself. But of course, we have seen some shocking and disturbing incidences and inappropriate conduct and serious criminality involving police officers. And we've debated this in this House many times, both since I've left the position of Home Secretary, but also during my time. It's right that Chief Constables and Police Commissioners across the country work to improve professional standards, and I've had many discussions to that effect on this as well. But it's important that we learn the lessons when things go wrong, that measures in clause 73 in particular on ethical policing and the duty of candour can build upon the work that has taken place in recent reviews. And of course there are still inquiries that are taking place, the Sarah Everard inquiry in particular that Dame Eilish is working on, and I think it's important that we maintain those standards going forward. We've got a lot of work to do with that. I'd like to touch on, Madam Deputy Speaker, please, and some areas where I do want to see greater scrutiny in this bill too, to ensure that measures will make a difference and this legislation will actually go further in some quarters. One area of reflection is clause 19, And I think my right honourable friend, the chair of the Justice Select Committee, touched on this already. And this is the measures on permitting entry into private premises without a warrant. Now, I'm the first to recognise the desired outcomes that the government are seeking to support the police to tackle the issue of stolen goods by enabling them to enter and search premises and seize items without a warrant. We all want to see those responsible for these crimes apprehended more quickly and goods returned to their rightful owners. That is absolutely right. Victims of crimes are quite frankly too often they're frustrated by the challenges when it comes to investigating these crimes and also when it comes to getting their goods back. But as the party of law and order, which believes in safeguarding the rule of law, I want to ensure that the risk to freedom and civil liberties with this power being introduced are also maintained and that due process is put in place, because the prospects of abuse and miscarriages of justice can also be present here as well. Yes, I would of course give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and I too share her slight misgivings about this clause. It'd be interesting to hear the argument the Minister makes. Obviously, there are circumstances already in law where if the police have reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime, they are able to enter your premises in pursuit of you or indeed the goods that you've supposedly stolen. And so I'm unsure what more this will add, and it would be interesting to see where the government takes it. Like her, I share a nervousness about breaching what has been a long-standing settlement with the British people about their own privacy and the ability of the police to invade it.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention, and of course he and I spent a great deal of time discussing policing powers in particular and what more we could do to strengthen policing powers around all aspects of criminality. I think it's right, the bill does actually include some safeguards, but also there are measures in place already. So we need to understand how these proposed powers will work, the processes around their authorisation of their use and the circumstances. But I think at this stage right now, this is early stage, and obviously this will go through committee, it'll go through scrutiny, but I think there are questions here to be addressed and answered, and of course we welcome those discussions. I would like to, Madam Deputy Speaker, say a few words about the provisions in the bill relating to nuisance begging and rough sleeping. I've already listened with interest to the comments that have been raised on both sides of the chamber on this. And as members will recall, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 contained provisions to repeal the Vagrancy Act 1824, which is nearly 200 years old. I and my colleagues in government at the time worked with all members of the House on this, and it was right that the repeal took place. And we spoke about the replacement legislation as it would come forward. But we do recognise dealing with homelessness is it is a sensitive and it is a highly complex issue. No one in this House is going to dispute that at all. I have actually worked with government, local authorities and charities on these issues as Home Secretary, as have my former colleagues, ministers in government as well on this. And in particular look to provide resources to support those sleeping rough on our streets and the right kind of interventions. Project Adder was brought in to deal with a lot of the addiction issues that are associated with homelessness. That is an incredibly successful programme. Working with local authorities, we must, Madam Deputy Speaker, see more investment from the government on that and see this rolled out. I do recall actually working with my right honourable friend, as policing minister back then for North West Hampshire, around specific cases, and he brought his London experience actually to the fore at the time, around problems in central London, Park Lane. We had some specific cases of begging and homelessness taking place as well. How we were able to actually address those issues and actually deal with, quite frankly, rough sleeping, which was causing a lot of problems in the community there. But I actually bringing in the police and Westminster City Council at the time and taking some proactive measures. We also know that there are some incredible charities doing some outreach work in London and across the community, and in particular those that are engaging with rough sleeping. I think we should also reflect that there are some veterans that have some complex needs that are also captured in this whole issue, including the whole challenges of mental health issues and some individuals that need trauma-informed support. That, you know, we really do need to invest time now across different government departments and agencies to actually tackle this, rather than looking at this just within a criminal justice bill. It's right that the government looks at the legislation that is required to prevent rough sleeping, but it's also essential that the government helps to bring in measures across other government departments to provide the right kind of help and support. So I think it'll be interesting to hear from ministers around the work that's going to take place in this area. And also to hear some of the reassurances that will come forward. Finally, I'd like to just touch on a measure that my friend, the Right Honourable friend, my friend from Gloucester has made about spiking. There's some work that's taken place on this already, and we have met with campaigners and victims of this horrendous crime. I've had the privilege, obviously, of working with police on spiking issues, and in fact, Chief Constable, Assistant Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, who was brought in to support all the work on violence against women and girls in particular. But we put in new restrictions around spiking, certainly during my tenure as Home Secretary, and some of those drugs that are used for spiking and brought in tougher sentences. We were also reviewing whether a new and specific offence was needed, which has not been brought forward. It is subject to debate. The Police Minister is familiar with all of this. And I think as this bill progresses, it will be very interesting to see where the government takes this, particularly because this is difficult to track, as we know from policing data. I think we should just recognise that as a House, but also we want to do more to prevent there being further victims of spiking. And we need to come together at that juncture to look at what are the practical measures that can be brought in place. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I really look forward to working with the front bench. We've got a very strong front bench who will be very diligent when it comes to building upon previous measures that have been put in place, but actually looking to strengthen the bill and bring in proper practical measures. Just to conclude, the country wants robust action. No one's going to dispute that at all when it comes to going after the offenders, punishing those that do dreadful things across our communities, and people that are basically left as victims after they've been hurt and harmed by offenders. It's right that the government brings this bill in. It's right that we work collectively to strengthen our laws, but actually we need practical measures to make sure that the legislation actually delivers for the victims. Well, we want less victims of crime, but actually to protect our communities and strengthen our safety.
Yeah.